Deer hunting occurs on Mohonk Preserve through a volunteer-based deer management program. Each fall, hunters who have previously cooperated by returning a hunting log and properly reporting their deer are invited to participate in another season. As volunteers in Mohonk Preserve's deer management program, hunters play a critical role in helping to mitigate the impacts of deer overbrowsing on the unique forests of the Shawangunk Mountains, donating over 7,000 hours of volunteer time annually. Following is a presentation about Mohonk Preserve's 2015 deer management program, hosted by Thruway Sporting Goods in Walden, New York. The complete PowerPoint presentation may be viewed on the Preserve's website at mohonkpreserve.org/hunting.
My name is Elena Batt. I'm the Deputy Director of Membership and Development at the Mohonk Preserve. I want to welcome you to Thruway Sporting Goods. They have generously sponsored this year's Mohonk Preserve Deer Management Program. So we hope you enjoy the store and shopping, and that you'll come back here and support our sponsors. I'd like to introduce our senior ecologist, John Thompson, who's going to be giving this evening's presentation.
Thanks, Elena. Thank you all for coming, and thank you to Thruway Sports for hosting this event, and I get this opportunity to talk with you all directly. A lot of you have spoken to on the phone or through email, but it's always great to be face-to-face, and then if you have any questions, you can always ask me. And Mario stepped out, but I just want to thank him. He's been running around all day, really been helpful to us. So it's been great that the Thruway Sports staff has been so helpful to us today. At the Mohonk Preserve, we are managing over 8,000 acres, including forests that are in danger of being lost over time. We are managing different species of wildlife. We want to protect the habitats for those species of wildlife, and our deer management program plays a critical role in mitigating the impacts of deer on the landscape. In addition, deer hunting is an important recreational resource. It's important recreation where there are many of our hunters who have been hunting on the Mohonk Preserve for generations. And I've talked to so many of you who have been hunting 20, 30, 40. How many years, George, have you been?
35 years.
35 years, yeah, since he was a little kid. He's been hunting on the Mohonk Preserve. People like that are really vested in the preserve, that recognize the Mohonk Preserve as a beautiful place, as an important area ecologically, and it's our hunters who are the volunteer land stewards that are helping us to manage this landscape. So the Mullen Preserve is on the northern end of the Shawangunk Mountains. The Shawangums extend from Rosendale, New York, into New Jersey. When they cross into New Jersey, it's called Kittatinny Mountain. It goes through the Delaware Water Gap and Blue Mountain in Pennsylvania. You can see the northern Shawangums are a place where the Shawangunk conglomerate is folded over several times and the mountain range widens out, where it's a ridge in the southern Shawangums into New Jersey. Mohonk Preserve is 8,000 acres. It's the largest nonprofit nature preserve in New York State. And it's our mission to protect the Shawangunk Mountains region and inspire people to care for, enjoy, and explore the natural world. And hunting is a part of that, where people can, most of the time you're sitting there and you're observing other wildlife, and beyond the time that you're hunting and watching deer out there on the landscape. The Mohonk Preserve is important ecologically. There are 57 state rare species that exist in the Shawangums. There's 8 state rare ecological communities. We have the second largest chestnut oak forest in New York State. There's 38,000 acres of unfragmented oak forest that we have on the Shawangums. And the Mohonk Preserve again is up here. This is Mohonk Lake, which the Mohonk Mountain is on the shores of. This is Minnewaska State Park Preserve, which is 23,000 acres here. The tan that you see is the Dwarf Pine Ridge community down at Sam's Point. You can see a lighter tan color, which are the pitch pine communities, the ridgetop pitch pine communities that we have in the Shawangunk. And this light green area are mostly oak forests that we have here in the Shawangunk. Now we know from pollen records from scientists that are looking at the vegetational history that oak forests have been dominant on this landscape for the last 7,000 years. So we know that all of the plants and the animals that are here that are part of that oak forest ecosystem have been here for a long time. We also know from the earliest settlement by Europeans in this area, with Henry Hudson coming up the Hudson River in 1609, and with the people that came up subsequent to that of the Hudson and started to settle in these areas, that they would note that there were a lot of deer in this landscape. There were also mountain lions, there were bear, there were wolves, and there were Indians that were living on this landscape. All of those were predating on deer. We don't have some of those anymore. As Europeans moved into the area, they started to cut down the forest. They used the forest for lumber. When the forestry grew, they recut it and made it into charcoal. They made it into barrels. They made it into barrel hoops. They tried to farm the Shawangums, which is very difficult. It's very poor soil, very thin soils. But they did end up clearing the entire landscape. And deer were extirpated from this landscape. They disappeared. This is from the Forest Commission of New York State, 1875. If you can read this, it says, deer virtually disappeared from the Catskill area about this time due to a disastrous man-supporting snow crust and the subsequent killing of large numbers of deer. At that time, market hunting was allowed. The forests were cut down, so there's no or very little habitat for deer. And then there were some really harsh winters that really took out the deer population. So there were no deer around here in the late 1800s. So the Mohonk Mountain House bought deer from Virginia in 1896, and they built a paddock with a 9-foot tall fence, and they put 9 deer in this enclosure, and they would feed the deer grain. You could call the deer over, they would eat. It was the only way that the Mohonk Mountain House guests could see deer. These deer that were inside this fenced area. Then New York State started to pass laws to protect deer. And the deer population started to slowly grow. In 1910, there was hunting allowed in Ulster County, which is the county that Mohonk Preserve is in. In 1917, the New York State Conservation Department gave Mohonk Mountain House a permit to cull deer because deer were causing damage in the gardens. In 1920, the hunting season was open at the Mohonk Mountain House. And some of the land that the Mohonk Mountain House had owned at that time eventually was bought by the Mohonk Trust and the Mohonk Preserve. So we inherited a lot of the hunting program that we have today. February 1951, Daniel Smiley, one of the Smiley family that started the Mohonk Mountain House, one of the descendants. I actually worked at the Daniel Smiley Research Center of the Mohonk Preserve and started a lot of the research that we do. He reported 150 deer at Brook Farm that he could see at one time in 1951. He was looking out into the fields and he could see 150 deer at one time. The deer population exploded between 1900 and 1950, and it continued to grow into the 1970s, so that Dan Smiley was born in 1907. 1977, he said, there's more deer on this mountain than there have been in my entire lifetime. And one of those reasons that there were more deer is that the forest regenerated over time. The forest regrew as agricultural land was abandoned, as people realized that they didn't have to farm 2 stones for every dirt in the Shangums and the Catskills, but they could move out to the Midwest and the West, and they could get lots better farmland. What you can see is that we'll look back into, this is 1895, from the Mohonk Mountain House Skybook, and you can see this is what the landscape looked like when there were no deer in the landscape. So as these fields started to grow, there was more forage for deer to eat. A lot of the natural predators were gone. There were no mountain lions and wolves, definitely. There were no bear around in this area at that time. The deer population, and there were no American Indians, the deer population started to grow and continued to grow through the 20th century. So this caused impacts on the Shangum landscape, including a deer browse line that you can see here. You can see the ground level is down here. You can see that there are no branches below about 4 feet high in the forest, because deer ate everything that was below there. And this is a photograph on the Mohonk Preserve. And so that has drastic consequences for a number of other species that live on the Mohonk Preserve and live in the forest of the Mohonk Preserve. This lack of shrub layer may decrease food for birds, cover nesting areas for songbirds, and increase predation rates, because there's no place for you to hide if you're trying to avoid a predator down in the lower levels of that forest. The lack of the shrub layer increases light and decreases the relative humidity, increases wind. Things dry out down in the lower levels of this forest because there's nothing to protect the salamanders, the other species that inhabit the leaf litter in the forest floor. There's a lack of regeneration of the forest canopy species. We don't see a lot of regeneration of oak forests, especially where there's no enrichment. And we see a lack of wildflowers. Wildflowers that we have records of at the Daniel Smiley Research Center that used to be abundant in the early and mid part of the 20th century. A lot of those are gone because the deer population and deer browsing has been going on for a long period of time, and we're living with the legacy of that. Now, deer are going to eat everything that they can reach. You can see over on the left that this red cedar looks like topiary that's been sculpted by the deer, that they ate everything that they could eat. And they are adapted to eat vegetation. They have incisors on their lower jaw, not on their upper jaw, so if they bite something, you can see that they'll leave a little tab on the twigs that they bite off. But the real business end of the deer is right here, the molars that they have and the premolars, that they're grinding all that vegetation, and they're eating 6 pounds of food a day. So they can have a lot of impact over a large area because of the foods that they're choosing to eat and the foods that they're choosing not to eat. This is a deer exclosure that was established 15 years before this photograph was taken. And if you look on the left side of the photo, there's sugar maple coming up. There's really dense shrub layer. On the right side, where you have deer, and this is a deer exclosure, so deer are excluded from going inside that fenced area. The deer have eaten pretty much everything, except there's some grasses and sedges that are growing out here. Is that a maple coming up in the middle? There's actually an oak that's growing right here. But yeah, somehow it's living outside that fenced area. So if you're a black-throated blue warbler, you want to nest in a really dense shrub layer. You want to glean food from the leaves. You're eating insects from the leaves of the shrubs that you're living in. You want to hide from predators. Which side of this fence are you going to live on? you're probably going to end up over on this side of the fence in the deer exclosure in this thick shrub layer. Those are the type of habitats that a lot of these shrub nesting birds are going to choose. So those are the type of habitats that we're trying to promote on the Mohonk Preserve. And this is an issue that's happening throughout the eastern United States. We're losing our oak forest. If you can read this quote here from a journal article that was published by McShay, there is an impending crisis in the decline of important tree species and the accompanying loss of wildlife habitat and ecosystem function in oak forest. Because the oaks aren't regenerating, we're not only losing the insects that depend on this oak bark, deeply fissured bark for its habitat, that feed on these oak leaves as part of their food source, but we're also losing oak mast over time. There are 96 different species that consume oak masts. So if you lose these oaks, you lose this little packet of food that they're depending on to get through the winter. Chipmunks depend on acorns, bear depend on acorns to get them through the winter. Turkeys and deer are big consumers of acorns. So if we want to keep all of the wildlife that we have on the Mohonk Preserve and in the Shawangums, then we really need to pay attention to this oak forest and try to promote its regeneration so that the oak forest that we have now won't be gone in 50 to 100 years, that we will have oak forests into the future. Because we're a land trust, we're managing in perpetuity. We're expecting that we will always be here. We will always be here to manage this landscape and to protect this habitat for the wildlife that lives here. Deer choose to eat some species, as I said, and they choose not to eat other species. One species that they don't eat is Japanese stilt grass, which is native to Asia. If you came to the Mohonk Preserve 20 years ago, you probably remember this, George. There was no stilt grass that was in the forest. There was no stilt grass on the forest floor. And now it covers a lot of areas of the Mohonk Preserve and a lot of the seeps that you go to. Even when you're way out in the woods on the preserve, you'll see Japanese stilt grass has popped up. And this outcompetes the native species that we have on the preserve. Now, Japanese stilt grass is what we call an invasive species, an exotic invasive species. This is what you might call a native invasive species. Hay-scented fern is something that deer won't eat. It produces lethal chemicals that inhibit the growth of other plants. It shades the forest floor so other species can't grow up under it. This may look like a nice little glade when you come up on it out in the woods, but you can still see that browse line that's out there. The deer have helped to determine, they've been one of the major drivers in determining what the vegetation will be. There's no regrowth of the canopy trees here. It's basically a monoculture of hay-scented fern. It's not a healthy forest. What you want to see in a healthy forest are beautiful wildflowers like the yellow lady slipper, the pink lady slipper, and the painted trillium. They're things that we rarely see out on the Mullen Preserve anymore because the deer browsing problem has been such an issue for so many years, and that's the biological legacy that we need to deal with. There's actually only one plant of that yellow lady slipper on the Mohonk Preserve along Lenski Lane. That's the only one that we have. When in the 1800s, the Mohonk Mountain House used to have carriage rides to go out and see the yellow and pink lady slippers in bloom. And they could take their guests out there. There are so many hundreds of them that they can see. And now we just have one of the yellow lady slippers. In a healthy oak forest, you also see a lot of oak regeneration. And through management, we can open up this forest or open up the forest canopy so that you not only have this big chestnut oak, but you have some regenerating chestnut oak that's below it. You also have red oak that's regenerating here. That's what we're trying to promote through the management of the forest of the Mohonk Preserve, and deer management plays a big part in that. As I said, our mature oaks are declining. There's very little regeneration of chestnut oak, red oak, black oak. What we are doing is a holistic approach to management of our forest, and strategic deer management is a big part of that. That you guys are out there as our volunteer deer managers, our volunteer land stewards, out there and helping us to control the population of deer to try to mitigate the overbrowsing that's happening on the Mohonk Preserve. And many of you, as I said, you've been hunting here for a long period of time. I've talked to hunters who they started hunting here 30, 40 years ago. They taught their sons to hunt on the Mohonk Preserve. Now they're teaching their granddaughters or their grandsons to hunt on the Mohonk Preserve. That it's a beautiful place that they want to share with their family through the generations. Besides hunting, we're also using prescribed fire to help to open up the forest floor, open up the forest canopy so that there's light on the forest floor, so that those little acorns can regenerate over time. We're managing for an invasive species, trying to remove Japanese stovegrass, Japanese barberry, some of the invasive species that we have on the Mohonk Preserve, and we're also thinning the tree canopy. So these four actions taken together in certain parts of the Mohonk Preserve, like along Oakwood Drive, we're not only making for a healthier forest, but we're making for better deer habitat. In those areas where you have that really well-defined browse line and nothing on the forest floor, it not only diminishes the habitat for a lot of other species, but it diminishes the habitat for deer. You probably don't see as many deer out there as you used to because there's no forage for them to eat out there. Like, why would they be out there? So we take about 65 deer per year off the Mullen Preserve. This graph only goes back to 1990. You can see that it does fluctuate over time. There were 85 deer that were taken in 2002. Last year we took 64 deer. That, depending on a lot of different circumstances, depending on the amount of effort, depending on the weather, depending on the number of deer that are out there, depending on what's out there in the forest, like when there's big mass deer, that might be a good year to hunt versus other years. We have 8,000 acres of land on the Mohonk Preserve, and most of that is open to hunting. And this is a copy of our hunting map that you get with your hunting permit. It shows the areas in green that are open to hunting on the Mohonk Preserve. It shows cross-hashed areas that are designated as no hunting, and all the areas within 500 feet of any residence are marked as no hunting on this map. You can also see, and this is important when you're filling out your bow hunter or your hunter logs, that there are different zones of the preserve. So what we want you to do is when you're out there filling out your logs, you're writing down how many deer you're seeing, how many bucks, how many does, how many fawns, where you are in the preserve, and how much time you're spending in each of these zones. I could also point out that we do have the trailheads of the preserve marked. There's the Coxing Entry, the West Traps, our visitor center, there's Pine Road, and Spring Farm. Those are designated parking areas that you're welcome to park at when you're hunting on the preserve. This is some of the data that we've collected from your hunter logs. This is looking at the bow season in 2014 and the number of deer that were observed by you guys that were out there hunting last year. And you can see that there are some zones where guys are seeing a lot more deer, and there are other zones where they're not seeing too many. But Zone 9 and Zone 3, for instance, Zone 9 includes Duck Pond and Glory Hill. Zone 3 would include the Buff area. So we're talking about this area down here and this area up here. That's where you saw a lot of deer last year. This is the number of deer that were harvested by zone over the last 3 years, from 2012 to 2014, 2012 in gray, 2013 in orange, and 2014 in blue. You can see about where people are seeing the deer, that's where they're getting the deer. So zone 9 and zone 3 again. Then you can see zone 6. In some of the years, there's good number in that area. So again, Duck Pond, Glory Hill, the buff up here, and then zone 6 is the Woodside tracts. So we just wanted to go through this. Everybody has this in their hunter packets, but this is the season at the Mohonk Preserve. We're going to start with archery on October 13th. It'll run through November 20th. And then we have these restrictions that we want you to be aware of. On Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, from sunrise to 8:45 a.m. and from 3 p.m. to sunset, from October 13th to November 5th, we have those restrictions. There's no archery that will be allowed on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays between 8:45 and 3 p.m. So, and the other thing is at the bottom, if you can read it, these time restrictions do not apply Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and from November 6th to November 20th. After November 6th, then the restrictions won't apply. This is the crossbow season, November 7th or November 22nd. We don't allow rifles on the Mohonk Preserve. Many of you already know that. Many of you are returning hunters. But just so for the new hunters that we met today that might be here, we don't allow rifles on the Mohonk Preserve. We do allow shotgun, handgun, crossbow, muzzleloader, and bow. The gun season will be November 21st to December 13th. Muzzleloader starts December 14th and runs through the 22nd. And just for everybody's safety, we want to have a safe and successful hunting season. Just to remind everybody, there's no sighting or firing across any trails, either authorized or unauthorized on the preserve, any roads or carriage roads. Adhere to the no hunting zone boundaries as we went over a few slides ago, and the Mohonk Preserve boundaries. Make sure that you're within the Mohonk Preserve. Our boundaries are clearly marked, so make sure that you are within the bounds of the preserve. And we are continuing to set back distances of 500 feet, even though the state setback distances did change this year. So it'll be 500 feet for all weapons. And again, I wanted to thank everybody for coming. I want to make sure that we do have a very safe and successful hunting season this year. I'm really excited about the enthusiasm that everybody's showing. I'm excited that so many people showed up today. This has been great. It's been a great opportunity for us to meet a lot of you, to talk with you. I hope to see you at the check station. I'll be there on the first opening weekend on Saturday, Sunday. So hopefully we'll get to talk over whatever gear you take during the season. And remember to fill out your hunter logs and submit them so we can put you on the priority list for next year. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for Lake Sports. Thank you, Mario.
You're welcome.